So good evening, everyone. Thank you very, very much for coming along to the final talk in our series for the Jubilee Talks, the Queen's Irish Ancestors with Mark Humphreys. Dr. Mark Humphreys is an assistant professor in computing with the Faculty of Engineering and Computing at Dublin City University. In that capacity, he lectures in artificial intelligence, web design, e-commerce, and operating systems. In 2018, he launched the Ancient Brain website, an open access platform to learn, practice, and share codes and coding. However, this evening, he's speaking to us in a private capacity as a genealogist with more than 38 years of experience. Beginning in 1983, Mark has traced his own descent from Irish rebels, his wife's descent from English aristocracy, and produced research culminating in nearly 2,000 public web pages focused on local and family history in Ireland, England, and Scotland. As well as taking an interest in mathematical models to determine the most recent common ancestors of all humans, he has written extensively on the topic of royal ancestry. This evening, Mark will be exploring Queen Elizabeth II's links to Ireland through her Irish ancestors, both royal and rebel. I will hand over to yourself, Mark. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you can share the screen.
Great, thanks, Nick. Okay, well. Okay, welcome everybody, and hi to my friends Bill and Karen. I see there. So everybody can screen share, see that hopefully. Okay, so hopefully I've a pretty interesting topic for you tonight. And I'm going to introduce some facts that are perhaps not widely known, and whether there are conclusions to those facts will be up to us, I guess. You know, perhaps they're just interesting things. Interesting ancestral descents, or perhaps, you know, they have something to say about identity. Okay, so hold on a minute. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to start with this picture. I absolutely love this picture. So this is a number of Irish chiefs kneeling in submission to Sir Henry Sidney, who was one of Queen Elizabeth's Lord Deputies, perhaps the toughest and most successful of her Lord Deputies in a tough era. So here he is on one of his campaigns in Ireland, and obviously he's won, and these chiefs are all kneeling in submission to him. So on the left-hand side, you have, if you like, the Irish, and on the right, my people, and on the right-hand side, you have sitting up on his throne is Sir Henry Sidney, representing England. So it's a great picture. I have an English wife, and she actually descends from Sir Henry Sidney, but we won't get diverted to that. But I like to say on the left there's my ancestors, and there's your ancestor. We're paying homage to on the right. So she enjoys that very much. But the thing about this kind of image, so this is from 1581, is it seems to imply there's, you know, sort of two different races. There's Ireland on the one side, and there's Britain on the other side, and especially royalty and nobility. So the question is that really how it is throughout history? You know, is that what genealogy in particular implies? So what I want to do is start by considering what genealogy is and how it differs from history. So history, historians, they go and they write books and do research about important topics, the origin of World War II, the reasons why Napoleon lost, and so on. And they say, as I say there, in the late 1930s, Winston Churchill became the leader of those in British politics opposed to appeasement. Then genealogy comes up with these kind of strange descents, these strange facts chains of descents throughout history, perhaps of no importance, such as I say here, and I've kind of made this one up, by the way, although it wouldn't surprise me if it was true. In the 12th century, one of Churchill's several million ancestors, because he would have several million ancestors back then, was a knight, a minor knight at some siege, let's say the siege of Jerusalem. I just made that one up. Now, so in a sense, that's irrelevant because it doesn't change what Churchill did, his life, it doesn't change his childhood, it doesn't change what was in his brain during World War II or anything like that. So is it of no importance? And there is one sense in which it is of importance, which is, let's assume that that knight was there at the siege of Jerusalem and he got shot by an arrow, then Churchill could not exist, literally could never have existed. Neither could many other people. So it does make history sort of layered in a strange way once you come up with these descents, because it means that all sorts of historical events in the Middle Ages, say, have a massive and definite impact on all sorts of events for hundreds or for all time to come. But certainly you can link them to specific people hundreds of years later. So here's an example of the kind of thing people come up with. So this is a Guardian article from 2005. And somebody discovers that George W. Bush, who was the president at the time, descends from Strongbow, the invader of Ireland. And this is totally true. He probably has dozens, maybe 100 descents from Strongbow. It's not that strange, actually, to descend from Strongbow. And people react to this in all sorts of ways. So as we can see, the Guardian here is reacting and saying, linking Bush to this great invader, because Strongbow invaded Ireland, Bush invaded Iraq, and so they're trying to make something out of that. So, but I think as logical people, we'd realize that Strongbow being one of your several million ancestors really has no impact on you, apart from the fact that we need Strongbow to exist, or else you can't. So these facts tend not to be well known. And just if you can see me selecting this line here, some modern figure is directly descended from some ancient figure. So regularly the media comes up with this and discovers that somebody or other in the modern age is descended from someone in the Middle Ages or in the past. Genealogists tend to go, yeah, we've known this for years. It's not actually news. That whole Bush thing wasn't news at all. It was, it was just news to the people writing it. And then historians, of course, react by saying, well, we're not really interested in that. What does it have to say? It doesn't have anything to say about Strongbow or Bush. Okay, so I'm not making any grand claims for genealogy, but I think it's perfectly natural to be interested in these chains of descents and to start thinking about what they mean in terms of where we're from and where our descendants will go in the future. But whether they mean the same things that historians try to find meaning in is another question. So today's example is the Irish ancestry of the Queen. And almost everything I say, perhaps with just one exception, is very well known to genealogists. I'd say hardly known at all to historians, and definitely not known at all to the general public. But to genealogists, most of this stuff is pretty well known. So I'm going to start off by saying, well, the Queen's genealogy. So the Queen, the royal family, obviously their genealogy must be better documented than almost anybody on earth. There must be endless books, and indeed there are. There's endless documentation about their ancestry. This one here, I like this book because it's getting out ahead of Prince William even having a name, and that's why it says Ancestry of the Royal Child. So even before he has a name in 1982, even before he's born, they're getting out a book about his ancestry. So the question is it all German for centuries? Is it the House of Hanover and all of that? And then that goes back, if you remember the origins of the House of Hanover, it somehow arose from the House of Stuart. in a perhaps controversial way. So what is this genealogy? Is it German, and then before that Scottish? So I'm going to open with something that is really not as well known as perhaps it ought to be. So we'll start off with Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland, famously killed unluckily killed in 1014. And the incredible fact that Brian Boru is the ancestor of every English monarch, not just recently, but since 1399, since Henry IV. So all of them since Henry IV, which includes pretty much all the monarchs involved in, let's say, all the plantations. All of them descend from Brian Boru. So how does this happen? How do you get a descent from Brian Boru to the entire British royal family since 1399? So these descents are all through the marriage of Aoife and Strongbow. So just to remind you, Aoife and Strongbow, the 1171, after the invasion of Ireland by the Anglo-Normans, Aoife MacMurrough was the daughter of Dermot MacMurrough, the King of Leinster, who invited the Anglo-Normans in. And the invader of Ireland, Richard de Clare, or Strongbow, the Earl of Pembroke. So there's this fantastic picture in the National Gallery in Dublin. And I don't honestly think that the marriage was like this, obviously. I'm pretty sure the painter doesn't think it was like this either. So it's an allegorical, it's a fantasy picture of the union of Ireland as the woman and England as the man, and I don't know what everything else that's going on: death, weeping, sacking, submission, all sorts. Yeah, anyway, whatever. There were probably books and articles written about this painting, so it's fabulous. Now, in reality, I'm sure it was a bit more normal looking. So how does this happen? And I'm going to explain how this happens, because it's going to sort of set the template for how British and Irish families intermarry over the centuries. So we have the invasion in 1169. Then the daughter of the powerful Irishman marries the powerful English invader in 1171. Their descendants do not all stay in Ireland. In fact, they almost all end up back in Britain, especially in England. And in the 1200s, their descendants are intermarrying constantly with English nobility. Then by the 1300s, their descendants are beginning to intermarry with English royalty. And then if we pick the date, it's the succession of Henry IV in 1399. From that point onwards, every single monarch descends from these two, who got married 200 years earlier. So we just have a look at how that happens. So first of all, just to establish that Brian Boru is the ancestor of Aoife MacMurrough, which does surprise people. So there's a summary. There are many summaries. I've just given one, but there's a great site by the late Leo van de Pas. Never quite knew was it Pas or Pa, but anyway, fantastic site, which is still being run even after his death by one of his collaborators. So Brian Boru's granddaughter married the King of Leinster, is how it happened. And their great-grandson was Dermot, the infamous King of Leinster and father of Aoife. So therefore, Brian Boru is the ancestor of everyone below Aoife and Strongbow, and that's where all the English nobility come in. So here's a quick example. Now this one shows, it might be a little hard to see on your screen, but actually the talk is available. You can probably see there's a URL there, so you can look at it later on. But just to walk you through it, it shows how you get from Aoife and Strongbow down to Mortimer, the Earl of March, one of the most powerful families in England. And then their daughter marries basically into the Plantagenets, into the royal family. And their grandson is Edward IV. And he himself then is the ancestor of the wife of James IV, sorry, the wife of Henry VII. So clearly, so we know, I don't know how well you know your royal family trees, but Henry VII is the ancestor of everybody after him. So therefore, Brian Boru is the ancestor of all monarchs, all English and then British monarchs below Henry VII. So how about Henry VII himself? Well, he descends, I'm not showing it to you here, but he descends from Aoife as well. And how about the House of Lancaster? Because we missed a couple on our way to Henry VII. We went through York, but we missed the House of Lancaster. So I have them here. So we're going sideways now. Just to try and give a summary, the crucial person is Blanche of Lancaster, who is the mother of Henry IV and the wife of John of Gaunt. So he nearly became king himself, but didn't quite, just died slightly too early. So Blanche of Lancaster, we go back through various families of English nobility, and it's Maud Fitzjohn is the link, if you want to look it up separately, that leads back eventually to the descendants of the Earl of Pembroke and Aoife McMurrough. So by Aoife coming in and marrying the Earl of Pembroke, and then their descendants staying in Britain and intermarrying with other powerful families, pretty quickly medieval nobility and then royalty are descended from the Irish High Kings. So every single monarch since Henry IV descends from Brian Boru, which I think is extraordinary and really should be better known, because it means this kind of thing. I mean, look at this guy. So this is Henry VIII descended to Brian Boru. He is. So you don't. So it's not something recent that maybe we can get a descent from Prince William or something. Henry VIII, Elizabeth I. They're all descendants from of Brian Boru. So again, this is not new. Genealogists know all this. It's been known for forever, really. Actually, I'm curious whether it was known when, let's say, Elizabeth was alive. Maybe it was worked out a little bit later, like in the 17th or 18th century. But I'd be surprised if it wasn't known before 1800. But possibly when she was alive, it wasn't actually known. Victoria, descendant of Brian Boru, needless to say. At this point, with Victoria, you're talking a vast number of lines of descent, and Elizabeth for sure. Okay, so that's our first line of descent, and perhaps it's the most fundamental one of all, which is all of them since 1399. From now on, I'm going to focus very much on the Queen. So there's actually more Irish descent for, let's say, Prince William, assuming he'll be the monarch at some point, through his mother. So there are more Irish descents, but we're not going to talk about those tonight. Charles doesn't have any more really through his father, can't give him, well, not that I know of. So, but Elizabeth gets some extraordinary descents through her mother. So through her father, she descends from Brian Boru. Through her mother, she descends from Brian Boru as well. But she also gets some of the descents I want to talk about here, which really are not very widely known. So I'm going to start off with Butler, which is one of the great medieval families of Ireland, one of the most powerful families. A dukedom came out of the family. They controlled, they controlled how do we describe it? Much of central, south central Ireland, in between Munster and Dublin. Their great castle at Kilkenny. So how does the Queen get back to Butler, the Duke of Ormond, and before that, Butler, the Earl of Ormond? And they are meant to be spelled differently, by the way. The E came in a bit later on into the family. So I'm trying to show you the summary here. So you can check it for yourself that I'm not making this up. So we start with Elizabeth II. We go back through Bow's line through her mother. Then we go back through Lyon, the Earl of Strathmore. And then we get back to Stanhope, Earl of Chesterfield. So this is pretty much the kind of thing you might expect, Scottish and English aristocracy. But the thing about Stanhope, the second Earl anyway, is that he marries the daughter of the Duke of Ormond, who I vaguely remember lived an awful lot in London. But whether they met up at court or how they met, I don't know. You can go look that one up. But certainly perfectly normal for the Duke of Ormond to be having his daughters marry into the English aristocracy. So the first Duke of Ormond then descends himself from the 8th Earl of Ormond. And Elizabeth II has other descents from earlier Earls of Ormond. Okay, so where are the Earls of Ormond getting us? Maybe it's not that strange that English aristocracy and ultimately English British royalty would descend from Irish aristocracy, the Anglo-Irish Earls of Ormond. But let's just go back in the Earls of Ormond and we'll find some amazing things. Okay, just before we do that, this is a great photo here. So this is a visit of George V, which I think we can spot that he had a real look in the back row there. He's visiting the Marquis of Ormond at Kilkenny Castle in 1899. And on the wall on the right is Thomas Butler, the 10th Earl of Ormond. He was a favourite of Elizabeth. She had many favourites, as you know. But he was also a cousin of hers, not too close, but they were enough. They were cousins. She was a descendant of Butler herself through Anne Boleyn, if I've remembered all that right. So you can interrupt me if not sure you can. Oh, we'll take questions at the end. Okay, so who does the Queen descend from in this picture? Well, she descends from George V, obviously, but she also descends from the brother of the fellow on the wall there, the brother of the 10th Earl. Okay, so let's go a little further back and we suddenly discover something amazing, which is through Butler, the Queen descends from the King of Leinster, and not the earlier King of Leinster with Aoife, that's Aoife's father, but a much later one in the 1400s. So she descends from Donal Ray MacMurrough Kavanagh. So the MacMurrough Kavanaghs were the later kings of Leinster. And he died in 1476, which is pretty recent compared to Aoife and Strongbow anyway. So the Queen, so just to look at the descent, the Queen descends from the first Duke of Ormond in the 17th century, who descends from the 8th Earl of Ormond, died in 1539, is the son of Sir James Butler by his wife, Sive MacMurrough Kavanagh, who's the daughter of the King of Leinster. And the extract here is from the complete peerage, but it's documented everywhere. I love the complete peerage. If you're ever tracking medieval descents, it's really that's the ultimate source, really, because it actually lists the sources of all this information, whereas pretty much every reference work, it just packs in these genealogies. So the complete peerage will try and source all the information, track it down, and disprove. I mean, the contrast is with Burke's peerage, which actually is quite accurate, at least after about 1870 or so. It's quite accurate, but it never gives any sources. So the complete peerage is telling us that now. The thing about Donald Ray McMurrough Kavanagh is that he is the grandson of Irish Og McMurrough Kavanagh, the King of Leinster. And this guy has been seen by many as a sort of a great Irish leader. Basically, he had his own independent kingdom in southern Leinster in this period when the Pale could not really control too much of Ireland. And he simply dominated southern Leinster during his lifetime. So he's the grandfather of that Donald Ray, ancestor of the Queen. So this fellow is the ancestor of the Queen. And there's an image from a 1885 book about him that sort of portrays him in a sort of nationalist light, as a sort of nationalist figure. Now, it's probably going a bit far to say he's a nationalist icon. I don't think he's that well known. But there are some figures later who are a bit better known. But certainly he's not the kind of guy you expect to be the ancestor of the Queen, but he is. Okay, so none of that is controversial. It's all very well documented. Now here's another amazing one, which is the Butlers enjoyed marrying Irish families. Basically, they were. There's another one in this line, directly above the Queen. So the Butler is an absolutely massive family with many branches, as I'm sure many of you know. And this line is directly above the Queen. That Sir James Butler descends from Sir Richard Butler, and his wife was the daughter of one of the lords, the Lord of East Breffni, basically Cavan, in the 14th century. So that's, I don't know as much about that as I should. I was just going through these descents. I'm no specialist in all these things. It's almost impossible to be a specialist in all these different families. But the O'Reillys is something I need to learn more about. But anyway, here we are in Burke's peerage, and there are other sources that are saying, yeah, absolutely, that's exactly what happened. Sir Richard Butler married this grand old Irish family, the Lords of East Breffni. So Gildas O'Reilly is also an ancestor of the Queen. Right, now, I'm sure you thought O'Brien might emerge at some point, because O'Brien is one of the most famous Irish families that sort of became, as an old Irish family, that sort of became aristocracy. Those weren't simply dispossessed and vanished, or they didn't start out as Anglo-Norman. So O'Brien is obviously an ancient Irish family, coming from Brian Boru, and the branch that led to the Baron of Inchiquin is perhaps the one that people think of in terms of this crossover from old Irish kings into accepting a title from the crown. So it's kind of interesting where your descendants end up then as a result. So, but we're going to start at the bottom. We're going to start with the Queen, and again, it's through her mother, which of course is half of her ancestry. So we go through her mother, and we get to Wellesley and Hill and Boyle. I've sketched it out there, but you can go and check it out later. And then Boyle, where's Eleanor Boyle there, descends from Dermot O'Brien, the 5th Baron of Inchiquin, who died in 1624. So I think I have a picture here that kind of illustrates the point. So the thing is that the O'Briens Barons of Inchiquin are the descendants of O'Brien, King of Thomond. So they were kings of Thomond for generations, and their proven descendants ended up surrendering their Irish titles and accepting a title from the crown. And then in the early 1500s, at the same time as they were doing this, or immediately, they started intermarrying with Anglo-Irish families. And the Boyle link is just an example here as to how it can happen. That we have Michael Boyle, the Archbishop of Armagh, Mary O'Brien, the daughter of Dermot O'Brien, the fifth Baron of Inchiquin, marries Michael Boyle, and he's a descendant of Boyle of Herefordshire, and they're ancestors of the Queen, based on the previous page. So let's see what happens a little earlier. So I'm back here in the complete peerage, just to give you something to look at. And this is the moment when it happens. So the fifth Baron of Inchiquin is the male line descendant of the last King of Thomond. So Murroch O'Brien here, the last King of Thomond, he becomes the first Earl of Thomond by surrendering his title, his Irish title. So he dies in 1551. But as the last King of Thomond, he's a descendant of earlier Kings of Thomond, and those are all male line descendants of Brian Boru. So it's not hard to look up his ancestors, and you get people like this, proven again every generation between him. And Conor O'Brien died 1268, King of Thomond, and I have him here because we do have his tomb, which we don't have for all the Kings of Thomond. So he's an ancestor of the Queen. Every single step is proven. So his tomb is there in County Clare. And then we can go back, and if you've been in St. Mary's Cathedral in Limerick, you've probably seen this. The surrounding, I believe, is new of this ancient slab that is meant to be, or perhaps it is, I'm not totally sure if it's definite, the tomb of Donald Moore O'Brien, the King of Thomond, and he built the cathedral. He founded the great. That's the massive cathedral in Limerick that he founded. So he died in 1194, which shows you how long there were kings of Thomond. O'Brien, King of Thomond, century after century. But he there is the ancestor of the Queen, and every step is proven. Here's a little chart that combines it. So it's a 1972 book here, and it shows the OBrien line and the Aoife line on one chart. So we start off with Brian Boru. It might be a bit hard to see this, but as I say, there is a URL up there on my website. I'll have my website address later. And so you can look at it up, look at it there later on. So it starts at Brian Boru. It goes down the right-hand side through Aoife and Strongbow. There they are. And then this was the segment I showed you earlier, the House of York, and then we get to Henry VII, and then he's the ancestor of everybody else. Then on the left-hand side, it goes down through all the kings of Munster, the king, and all these kings of Thomond, generation after generation for centuries, the O'Brien's King of Thomond, and then they surrender their title and become Lords Inchiquin. And then finally we get to Mary O'Brien there, who marries Boyle. And then there's a series of things, but I don't know if you can see the text there. It says Richard Wellesley, and he is the brother of the Duke of Wellington. So we're going to get back to that later. You probably know the Duke of Wellington was born in Ireland. So we're still talking here about people who were born in Ireland. The Archbishop of Armagh, I'm not sure he was born in Ireland, but he became Archbishop of Armagh anyway. I have to check where he was born. But down as far as Richard, we've got people who were born in Ireland. Then finally we get outside of Ireland and we get intermarriage with the Earl of Strathmore and then the Queen Mother. So that's 1972. So that was reasonably well known to genealogists anyway. But it leads to some amazing things that I've been looking into. So basically, I freely admit that for this talk, I'm trying to make the Queen look as Irish as possible. So basically, I'm trying to find how much Irishness I can find among her ancestry. So we know all the other stuff. We know there's lots of Germans, we know all the English, we know all the Scottish. So I'm just doing one angle. And then at the end, we'll say, so is there any conclusion, or is it just fun? Okay, so here's one for you, that the 5th Baron of Inchiquin, the ancestor of the Queen, descends from Christopher Nugent, the 5th Baron Delvin. So they are of Delvin Castle in County Westmeath. So we're going all over Ireland here. We've had Clare, Limerick, Westmeath, and we're going to have a lot more. And Kilkenny, of course. And his wife, Mary Fitzgerald, who's the daughter of the Earl of Kildare. Now, I'm going to park the Earl of Kildare for the moment. So you probably thought the Earl of Kildare has got to make an appearance too. If the Butlers are there, the Fitzgeralds must be there, and they are. I'll talk about those in a minute. But first, I just want to talk about Christopher Nugent, because he did one amazing thing, or at least he's thought to have done it, which is he's thought to have written this primer on the Irish language in 1564 when he was very young, and presented it to Queen Elizabeth in 1564. And so very early primer, and you can see Irish, Latin, English, and you can read it as well. I am well in English here, and Tom Gama in Irish over on this side. So these are absolutely aristocracy with titles granted by the Crown, with lands and castles. But they're also, or some of them at least, are also interested in the Irish language and Irish and other parts of Irish culture. And then with the Butlers, there's intermarriage with old Irish families that we saw. And of course, they're not the only ones, but they're the ones I found in looking at the Queen's direct ancestors. Okay, so there's Nugent, and he is an ancestor of the Queen, presenting his primer on the Irish language to Queen Elizabeth, who of course is not an ancestor of the Queen, right? Because she's not an ancestor of anybody. And we're talking direct ancestor, your great, etc. grandmother. Obviously, she was nobody's mother. But obviously the Queen is closely related to Elizabeth, just not directly descended, like she is from Nugent. Okay, so the Earl of Kildare. So I said the Earl of Kildare had popped up there. Apart from Butler, the great family of Fitzgeralds. So we just showed that she descends from the 11th Earl of Kildare. And he's the son of Garage-Og, the 9th Earl of Kildare. And that's Garage-Og. And his father was Garrett Moore. So the senior and junior, the father and son, Moore and Og. Both of them are ancestors of the Queen. And they're interesting because obviously people are interested in the fact that at this period, especially with these two, the Fitzgeralds were almost running Ireland, and they had an enormous amount of independence. How about the other Fitzgeralds, the Earls of Desmond? We can do them as well. So we're beginning to run out of medieval Irish families. So the Queen descends from the Earls of Desmond, and here's how I can get her to the Earls of Desmond. But possibly there's an even better way somewhere, but I had a look around, I had a hunt around, and this is the best one I can see immediately. So she descends from the first Duke of Ormond. We go back to the Butlers. He descends from the 9th Earl of Ormond. That's easy enough to establish. By his wife, Joan Fitzgerald, and she's the daughter of the 10th Earl of Desmond. So he's not the rebel Earl of Desmond. That would be cool. But he's the 10th Earl of Desmond, and that's quite recent. We're talking 1529. I mean, again, it's all relative compared to Ephraim Strongbow or some of the others in the 1300s. We're talking about fairly recent descent from the Earl of Desmond. And a bit more Irishness. Here's a sculpture. If you've ever been to Newcastle West in County Limerick, there's a great castle there. And there's this sculpture outside it. So this is the castle of the Earls of Desmond, Desmond Hall in Newcastle West. And a few years ago, a sculpture was erected outside it to the 3rd Earl of Desmond. And probably mainly because he wrote poetry in Irish. So he's a very interesting character. Garoid Irla, the Earl Gerald. And he wrote poetry. I don't know anything about his poetry, but I know he wrote poetry in Irish. And he's an ancestor of the Queen, which of course he is. So let's keep going. Now, here's one which always amazes people. It really does. And it's Hugh ONeill, the Earl of Tyrone, the rebel, the guy who led his own entire rebellion against the crown. Lost, of course, died in 1616. How does the Queen descend from this fellow? So he descends through Wellesley from Anne Hill, as shown above. You'll have to probably get onto this page when we're done, and you can follow the links, but I did show you the pictures at least. Anne Hill then through Stafford, McDonnell, and McGuinness from the rebel Earl, the Earl of Tyrone. Now, obviously, as the Earl of Tyrone, he wasn't a nobody. You tended to be somebody to lead a rebellion in those days, and he certainly was a somebody. And his children did not, marry people as well who were prominent. So his Arthur McGuinness there marries Viscount McGuinness marries Sarah, the daughter of Hugh ONeill, and that is the rebel Earl, Hugh ONeill, Earl of Tyrone. Okay, so then you get something like this, which I just found randomly posted online. I don't even know where it's from. So here we have our Gaelic rebels. So what could be more of a rebel than Hugh ONeill, the Earl of Tyrone, the 9 Years' War? But probably missing in all there is that she's an ancestor of the Queen, which she is. And where does he come from? Well, of course, as I said, he's not a nobody. These are O'Neills, kings of Ulster, and there's a High King of Ireland in there. In fact, the last High King of Ireland, Brian O'Neill, the last generally agreed High King of Ireland, died in 1260. Okay, all of them ancestors of the Queen. Now, this is the one that I think isn't so well known. I think the one from Hugh ONeill, genealogists know about that. I've seen it in a couple of places. But I haven't seen this one noticed too much by genealogists, which is the man who started the Desmond Rebellion. So the first Desmond Rebellion wasn't started by the Earl of Desmond himself. I'm not a total expert in the Desmond Rebellions, I'm afraid, so hopefully I'm not getting anything wrong. But it was started by this man, James, who's a relation of the Earls of Desmond, James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald. And he started that, went into exile, and then he came back with an invasion force from the continent and started the second Desmond Rebellion. So, I mean, if anyone is responsible for the Desmond Rebellion, it's this man. And he died in battle in 1579 when he returned. So as shown above, the Queen descends from the 5th Baron of Inchiquin and his wife, Ellen Fitzgerald. And if you look at her ancestry, which you can through these links if you go onto this page. It's quite easy to see that she descends from the rebel James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald. And that's his signature when he submitted in 1573, but they didn't chop his head off, so he was free to go to the continent and come back for round two. But he's an ancestor of the Queen. It's absolutely amazing. So that one I think is not very well known. So getting towards a summary of all this amazing information, and I think this one really sums it up. This is Wikipedia's list of Irish uprisings. It's as good a list as any. And it starts off with Silken Thomas, his rebellion in 1534, and it goes all the way up to the present day. But we're going to stop. We're going to stop with the Williamite War. But just have a look at this list and listen to the following. So we can link the Queen to 6 of the first 8, and not on the royal side, not on the crown side, on the Irish side. Well, we can link her to the crown side, obviously. Now, we might have to be a little bit broad-minded as to what the Irish side is, but it does illustrate something amazing about the nature of the relationships between the two islands, I think. Or maybe it's just fascinating facts. But anyway, have a look at this. 1534, Silken Thomas Rebellion. Well, the Queen descends from his brother. Right? She doesn't descend from Silken Thomas, but she descends from his brother. The first Desmond Rebellion and the second one, she descends directly from the main leader, who was killed in battle. Right, we got 3 of them so far, and we're now going to get 4. The 9 Years' War, she descends directly from the main rebel leader, Hugh ONeill, in the 4th one there. Then we have O'Doherty's Rebellion in County Donegal. I can't do anything with that, but maybe something will turn up at some point, and we'll discover she descends from O'Doherty as well. But I couldn't get anywhere on that one. The Irish Rebellion of 1641. I can't do anything there, except to say, believe it or not, that Prince William descends from Rory O'More in the 1641 rebellion. But that's for a talk in a number of years' time, if I'm still going. So the Irish Confederate Wars is the next one that I can do something with, the Queen. Now, we do have to get a little bit more broad-minded at this point, because she descends from the royalist leader, so he's not really in rebellion against the crown, he's in rebellion against the parliamentarians. So she descends from the top royalist leader, the first Duke of Ormond, in the war in Ireland. And so he was allied with the Irish Catholic Confederation against the parliamentarians. So if you like, as part of that alliance, she can be linked to the Irish side. And then perhaps the slightly more desperate one, but is tenuous. You know, she can obviously be linked to the Jacobites. She descends to the aunt of King James, but of course she descends to the other side too, in the Jacobite Williamite War. So, so I reckon 6 of the first 8 we can put the Queen in there. I can't do anything with the 1798 rebellion, either for her or Prince William. Okay, so oh, I'd forgotten. I did have a couple more things. So not too much more. So I'll try not to delay. Wellesley. Let's just take another quick look at the Wellesley line. She descends from the first Marquis Wellesley, and he's the brother of the Duke of Wellington. So we saw that earlier. And these are an Anglo-Irish family. These people were born in Ireland. And through them, she descends from some interesting Irish families. So we're not necessarily looking at nobility anymore. Well, obviously with the Marquis we are, but earlier. We're looking at Colley of County Kildare, which reasonably well known. Usher of Donnybrook Castle, so Archbishop Usher, you probably heard of, are relations, not the Archbishop Usher who said the earth was created in 4004 BC. He's a relation, but he's not a direct ancestor. One person who is a direct ancestor is the Archbishop of Dublin, who built Rathfarnham Castle. So if you've ever been in Rathfarnham in County Dublin, there's a lovely castle there, lovely tea rooms, and was built by the Adam Loftus, the Archbishop of Dublin, direct ancestor of the Queen. So it's an ancestral home of the Queen, if you like, this castle that you can go on a tour of. I want to look at Usher for a minute. So not the Archbishop, because he's not a direct ancestor. He's only a mere relation. But this guy called John Usher. So what we're looking at here is a cover page of the first book ever printed in Irish in 1571, ever. And you can possibly see from the image that it's printed by Sean Usher Alderman, just about there. John Usher, Alderman John Usher. He was born in 1524 of Donnybrook, where there was a castle in County Dublin. There was a lovely castle, sadly, totally gone. And John Usher is a direct ancestor of the Queen. So the man who printed this book, the first book printed in Irish, a hugely important book in Irish language, is an ancestor of the Queen directly through Wellesley and the Queen Mother. And you can actually follow all these. If you get onto this page, you can literally follow all these lines up and down, back to John Usher and back down to the present day. So just to end this section on the Queen's most recent Irish ancestor of any sort, Irish born. So the Queen, her most recent Irish born ancestor is the first Marquis Wellesley that we said already, how he connects, the brother of the Duke of Wellington. Born in Ireland in County Meath in 1760. And interesting thing about him was he became Lord Lieutenant of Ireland for many years, in fact, in the 1820s and 1830s. A 7-year stint, as you can see there, in the 1820s. So he lived here. There's Ross and Uachtaráin, where the president now lives. But in those days was where the Lord Lieutenant lived. So this is where Marquis Wellesley lived, the Queen's ancestor. And in contrast to many Lords Lieutenant, he was born in Ireland. Here he is entertaining at the Viceregal Lodge, as it was called then, in 1834, shortly before the end of his office. In fact, he's visiting Rathfarnham here, which is kind of nice. I don't know if he knows that's where actually, was it his ancestors? I'd have to check now whether it's his ancestors or whether it's just the Queen's ancestors through a side branch. I think it's it. Anyway, I can check that later. But we were just talking about Rathfarnham anyway. Certainly the Queen's ancestors. And here is the moment he leaves, December 1834. So that is the day that the Queen's last Irish-born ancestor leaves Ireland in 1834, and then she's born in 1926. So I'm comparing slightly here deliberately with Americans whose ancestor leaves Ireland in 1834, and then in the 20th century they start doing their family tree and they realize, their great granddaddy lived in Tipperary or wherever. So the Queen has something similar going on here. That's her last Irish ancestor leaving Ireland. Okay, so does this mean she's Irish? So, well, okay. So what I wanted to do on this page was just talk about. Let's take one angle and say, is she German? Because that's something people say about the royal family. And or is she English? Well, her mother seems rather Scottish. This Irish stuff seems a bit further back. So let's just look at the German thing. So if you just look at I just select here. The Queen and the royal family are often called German. Doesn't make any sense. Now, if you sketch out the way I do it here, and there's a logic behind this, then perhaps it doesn't make much sense. I mean, she was born in England, right? Her father was born in England. His father was born in England. His father, his mother, and this is all the royal line. These are all the monarchs. Then we're back to Victoria, born in England, and her father, where she inherited the crown through, was born in England as well. So she ultimately, it comes from her grandfather, George III, but he's born in England as well. His father, then eventually we get somebody in the House of Hanover, born in Hanover in this case. But now you're back in 1707. Okay, so going through the line of succession, you had to go back to 1707 to get someone not born in England. There's no Scotland, there's no German, there's no Irish. So if you follow the line of succession, which is what I just did, then it makes the Queen look very English. But as I'm sure you know, and that would be a different talk, one I know not too much about, but I certainly know that for generations, there was an enormous amount of German input ever since the beginning, the origin of the House of Hanover. So if you look at all the spouses on her father's side, pretty much everybody, I think, so forget her mother's side, but if you go on her father's side and look at all the female lines, she's going to look very German. If, however, you follow her mother's side, which of course is half of her, she doesn't look German at all because there's no German there, or, well, I wouldn't say, never say never, but it's mainly Scottish and English, and a little further back, quite a bit of Anglo-Irish. So it's just raising the question as to how we view, how we focus on our identity as a choice. Now, the Americans, of course, deal with this issue all the time, where they tend to be more of a mix than most countries. It's not that strange to meet Americans who say, oh yeah, I'm part Swedish, part Scottish, part Irish, part Spanish, and on it goes. So what exactly are they? So it may be a choice which line to look at. So what does this mean? So I threw a bit of text here, but sure, I'll read it out. What does this mean? Well, we've shown that there are many descents of the Queen from Ireland, from not just Anglo-Irish families, but old Irish families, old Gaelic families. We may have wondered, are there any that she doesn't descend from? Certainly, we covered a lot of ground in terms of Anglo-Irish and Old Irish. And as a result, Ireland is full of her ancestral homes, some of them in ruins and some not even in ruins. And ancestral tombs, we saw one above. So what does this mean? Should we change our view as to what, does this apply to other families in Britain? Of course it does. I mean, we looked at this through her mother's family, which is Scottish and English aristocracy. So maybe this applies to any Scottish and English aristocracy, do most of them have Anglo-Irish ancestry? That's an interesting question. Certainly loads of them do. Doesn't mean anything. These descents are certainly facts, independent of any conclusions. You could say, obviously you could have all sorts of conclusions that we ought to, the Queen, we ought to embrace the Queen's Irishness. Maybe she ought to embrace it, and in Ireland we ought to embrace her, or you could just say they're just facts, no matter what conclusions you draw from them, which they are. So genealogists are big into just finding out these descents and leaving these sort of conclusions to the historians, perhaps. But when you decide it might be fun just to find out how much Irishness we can find for the Queen, then it's hard not to think that it does say something interesting. So I'm certainly inclined to think popular culture ignores these kind of descents because it kind of wants to. It doesn't quite have a home for them. it maybe feels they're a bit awkward. I feel the fact that Henry VIII and Elizabeth both descend from Brian Boru is a bit awkward for narratives of Irish history. But as a genealogist, I can see that it's totally true. So maybe they challenge a narrative about who the Queen is, which is certainly would not be Irish, English perhaps, German perhaps, but not Irish. And it challenges who our ancestors are when you're looking at the past. So, we'd relate her and future royals to the royal family at the time, obviously. We'd relate her to Elizabeth I, not to the guy who surrenders to Elizabeth I. So when James Fitzmaurice Fitzgerald is in rebellion against Elizabeth I, should she identify with the rebel because he's actually her ancestor and not with the Queen because she's not. She descends from Elizabeth's aunt, but not from Elizabeth. Okay, and here's a question perhaps for everybody, and I'm bringing in Barack Obama here, which is, when you descend from a mix, who do you identify with? Now, a lot of us perhaps think we don't descend from a mix, or at least we don't know that we descend from a mix. So that's common because a lot of people, we don't know an awful lot about our ancestry. Some people really know that they descend from a mix and it's found out. Probably all of us do, if you just think about the numbers and the amount of time that passes and the amount of travel people did and intermarriage. You need a very small amount of travel and intermarriage in order to have a rather diverse set of ancestors, a lot more diverse than you might think. And if you went back to 1400 and can meet them all, you'd be pretty much amazed. And there would be, not sure what the numbers would be in 1400, a couple of million perhaps, of your ancestors. And I think I'd be pretty certain that some of them would be the kind of people you just wouldn't believe are your ancestors. How can these people be my ancestors? I thought I was Irish, or I thought I was Scottish, or whatever. So there's Barack Obama visiting his ancestral homeland, and I'm pretty sure he didn't think of himself as Irish growing up. I think it was found for him by hardworking genealogists. I mean, Joe Biden thought of himself as Irish. I think he knew all about that. But some of the other presidents, genealogists get to work and the invite goes out and they come over. And he could identify very much with his Irish ancestors because they genuinely are his Irish ancestors. They're literally his ancestors, and this is literally his ancestral homeland, and that town is literally the place his ancestors lived. So likewise with the Queen, there are an endless number of families and places in Ireland that she could identify with, and they'd be just as valid as better known places in England and Scotland and Germany. Okay, so I'll just finish there. There's the Queen visiting her ancestral homeland in the same year, actually, same month, I think it was, as Obama visited his ancestral homeland. The descents are all on my site. Every line proved. I'm big into proof. And in particular, really most of them you can get, just put /Ireland at the end of my site, which is humphrysfamilytree.com. And you'll get it, and you can probably see the URL on the screen, which is talk.queen.html. You can literally just go to my site, as long as you get to my site, and just search for talk on the Queen or something, or High Kings of Ireland or something. There's a search box there. Okay, so hopefully some of that was interesting, and could take questions.
Thank you very, very much for that, Mark. That was very interesting. Do you want to just stop sharing your screen for a second?
Sure, yeah.
There we go. And then we'll get the gallery view back up so everyone's here. That was very, very interesting. Picking up on one of your last points there, going back to 1400, So that's about 600 years ago. I did some back of the beer coaster maths here. That is about 20 generations, which I work out to be 1,048,576 direct ancestors. And of course, if you go back a further generation, or if you throw a couple more generations into that, then you double it each time.
Yeah.
Which begs the question, do we have a sense of what the population size was and how many ancestors we're supposed to have? And one presumes there must be a lot of cross-linking. I mean, even some of your family trees that you had up there showed that the Queen is descended from the same people multiple times, with them crossing backwards and forwards. But, you know, that there's the old adage of everyone in Europe is descended from Charlemagne.
Yeah, true.
How much can we actually say that, say, with Brian Boru, that everyone in Ireland is descended from him, or Niall of the Nine Hostages, or any of these figures?
Yeah, no, you make a great point about were there even 1 million people in Ireland in 1400? And because it's exponential, it's 2 to the power of the number, as you say, 2 to the power of the number of generations, then we don't have to stop with Ireland pretty quickly. It's bigger than the population of the world, because, you know, you could say in 1400, well, maybe some of those 1 million people were in Britain or wherever, or France or wherever. But once you get to the population of the world, there, you know, you can't use that argument. So exactly as you say, I think basically from today, if you go back to about 1100 or so, you need more ancestors than the population of the world. So clearly they aren't different people. You know, once you have whatever that is, 40 million or something, or 100 million, they are not different people. They're the same people being renamed or being named thousands of times. And yes, with some of these families of aristocracy that are documented, because obviously the powerless, the serfs were not documented. Most of our ancestors were not documented. It's only these aristocratic families. But even with those, you can just see the endless intermarriage that is then taking place anyway in all the other families. So, because people didn't travel, so you married somebody from the local village, and basically they were your fourth cousin, pretty much always. You know, your third cousin, maybe your fifth, but they probably weren't any more distant than your seventh cousin or something. It'd be kind of hard to meet anyone who was more distant than your seventh cousin for most of human history. So it's just endless intermarriage. But yeah, the point about proving, so I have a different, so this is a kind of a different talk, but I have quite a section on what's the most recent common ancestor of all of humanity, all of Europe, all of the West, all of Britain and Ireland, all of Ireland, whatever. And it's incredibly recent, or at least so we think. So you basically, the way to do it, I think people would agree, the way to do it is with computer simulations. That, because if you're saying, let's say Brian Boru, is Brian Boru the ancestor of everybody in Ireland today? Well, the problem is that for most people in Ireland today, they don't have, written ancestries going back to Brian Boru. The only way to get back to Brian Boru is through one of these links to aristocracy or something, or to landed gentry, and then maybe earlier to some nobility, and then earlier you get into one of these well-documented lines, and that could be only one of your millions of lines. So there's only a certain percentage of people could do that, and then of that small percentage, only a tiny percentage of their ancestral lines. So basically, you're missing, most of it is in darkness. You're just missing because the records aren't there for most marriages and reproductions throughout history. So what you do is a computer simulation, and you say, well, let's say there are people, and they have a certain number of children on average, and some die, some don't, and some have children, some don't. And there's a certain, and you can play with all these numbers, and then you can set up some kind of, well, first of all, you can have everybody marries everybody, which is not, we agree that's not realistic. The pauper doesn't marry the prince, you know, we agree. And but you have everybody marry everybody, and you see how quickly one person becomes the ancestor of millions, or basically the whole island, let's say if it's Ireland or Britain or wherever. And you can even model in some immigration and see, does that matter too much? And then you can put in some barriers, like there's princes and there's nobility and there's gentry and there's professional classes, you know, lawyers or something, and then there's wealthy farmers, and then down the bottom there's the landless aglabs who've got nothing. So and then you have barriers, and you say, well, Labour has a certain percentage of marrying into with a landowning farmer, you know, and a landowning farmer is a certain percentage of marrying with landed gentry, sort of thing. And you can make those barriers, and they don't make a huge amount of difference. So basically, it turns out that if you have children and your line does not die out, so you have a couple of children, then you have grandchildren, and so long as that doesn't die out, and after 100 years, you'd know whether it's going to die out or not. You know, it basically, it will then grow forever until it takes over the entire world. So, and it doesn't take long, not long in, you know, meaning after, it all depends how you do these numbers. So they're not my computer simulations, although I had some students doing one, but there's a big one that was written up in Nature. But basically, with a place like Ireland, which is reasonably self-contained, certain amount of immigration coming in and out, somebody living in 1000 AD, if they had a line that did not die out, then they would be the ancestor of everybody in Ireland today, except for obviously somebody who just got off the plane from somewhere else. But since they'd probably be the ancestor of about 80% of Britain and 60% of France, and you know, get off the plane from Nigeria or someplace, you know, then obviously Brian Boru is not your ancestor. But to be the ancestor of the whole world, it might take as little as about 3,000 years, which means Egyptian pharaohs, for example, could be the ancestor of everybody on the planet. But it's not just Egyptian pharaohs, it's also the people who put the shoes on their horses, or if they had horses or whatever, you know, the people who clean the toilets. They're also the ancestor of the whole world. And likewise, Brian Boru, the guy who cleaned his shirts or whatever, he's also the ancestor of everybody in Ireland today. So the numbers are amazing, and it's all about exponential growth. But that's a bit of another talk, slightly, I think.
Thank you. I can see a couple of hands going up there. I think Seamus's hands were up first. I know John O'Connor is in the queue as well. Seamus, did you have a question there?
Yes, well, not so much a question as a comment. Appreciate, Mark, your reference to the connection through the Queen's mother with Hugh ONeill and the marriage of the daughter Sarah. I noticed in your on your slide a reference to marriage to McGuinness. McGuinness, a Scottish name, I think, standard. And I cannot help but think about the fact that when the Queen shook hands with one Martin McGuinness, his name being what we would call here in Ireland a plantation name, just a thought, which of them has more Irishness and which has less Irishness? An interesting question, not seeking an answer. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, the whole crossover the whole British-Irish crossover is shown in names. I mean, Adams is another name, right?
Yeah.
You know, obviously those people are just looking at the male line. So the whole thing about the surname is it's the male line is what you get. And nobody ever sees those female lines. And so sometimes people can fixate on the male line and they don't see the female. So my mother and father, for example, so my father's Humphrys, obviously, but they come from a long line of County Limerick farmers whose origin is just unknown. So just poor, well, you know, humble Catholic farmers in County Limerick. And then my mother was or is a Flanagan. So whenever she wants to annoy my dad, she'd say, Usher, you just came over with Cromwell. So there's no one could accuse the Flanagans of coming over with Cromwell. But of course, dads, well, first of all, we don't know that they came over with Cromwell, but of course, his mother was O'Mara, but you see, that didn't count. You know, what counted was that he was Humphrey. So it's a bit like what I was saying about the millions of different lines that people have. You know, the surname is one where people are fixated on the male line and don't look at the others, and which so obviously with the Queen we're looking at all sorts of different lines. But I don't know much about whether Martin McGuinness is connected to the Viscount McGuinness. I'm just looking at him here, of County Down. I don't know much about his family either. But obviously, as you say, it's not you know, it certainly would seem to be a name that goes back to the plantations rather than to Gaelic Ireland. So it's you know, I mean, I just love the crossover and the intermixing of all of this kind of stuff when you get going on it.
Thank you, Mark. John, did you have a question there?
Yes, please. I think that Brian Boru has to be, as mentioned by yourself, a really top candidate for being the ancestor of us all. It is said that he had 1,000 concubines. and if that's the case, then it's surely for most of us unavoidable that he was an ancestor. But I'd like you, well, you perhaps to comment on that, Mark. But Nick, you also mentioned someone else who was you thought might be an ancestor of us all. Who was that, and why did you think he was an ancestor of us all?
Well, here's the thing, right? Which I don't know about the 1,000 concubines. Probably sounds like propaganda, maybe. So whether that's by his friends or his enemies, I don't know. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? But anyway, look, I suppose the point I wanted to leap in with was that none of these mathematics, if you like, are rely on you having a large number of children at all. All you need to have is one or two, just a line that doesn't die out. That's all, and then it won't die out. It'll just grow forever. So none of it relies on anybody being particularly fertile or having a large number of wives or concubines. You know, the maths just still works. And as I say, it isn't even really Brian Boru. It's actually anyone who lived in 1000 AD who had descendants that did not die out. And the maths would tell you that's about 60 or 70% of the people who lived in 1000 AD. So it's loads of humble people whose names we'll never know. And the only reason we know that Brian Boru is part of the 60 or 70% is because we know Brian Boru's line did not die out. So he's one of the 60 or 70%, but so's the whole population. You could walk into any village in Ireland in 1000 AD, and the majority of the people in the village are your ancestors. So it wouldn't just be him. And I think I mentioned, as other people, People talk about all sorts of people as candidates because basically you need someone whose line hasn't died out. So pick and choose. William the Conqueror as the ancestor probably of everybody in Britain and probably of everyone in Ireland too. Charlemagne, a good candidate for the ancestor of every person in the West. I mean, we're talking the 8th century, so the numbers would suggest, and we know Charlemagne's line did not die out. I mean, the Queen is a proven descendant of him, as are, there's probably a couple of million people who can actually prove they're linked to Charlemagne. So Charlemagne is probably the ancestor of every human in the West.
But the question also for Nick, you mentioned someone other than Brian Boru as an ancestor. Who was that? Can you remember, Nick?
Oh, me? No, I don't know. I don't recall, John. Sorry.
Doesn't matter. Not important.
I think it was Charlemagne.
It was Niall.
It could have been Charlemagne.
It was Niall of the Nine Hostages.
Oh, yeah.
It was Niall.
Thanks,
Tell us why Niall of the Nine Hostages is a candidate.
Well, Niall of the Nine Hostages, so my understanding is he's at the absolute limit. He's generally regarded to be historical, but he's really at the absolute limit of saying that we know this man existed. But if he did exist, he's so far back. Well, first of all, he hasn't known, or at least an alleged, assuming he is historical and, as I say, he's right at the limit. He is a direct ancestor, if I'm right, of Hugh ONeill and those O'Neill kings of Ulster. There is a genealogy for them going right back to him. I don't know the status of every link, but it's certainly possible. And given how far back he is, and that we know, if we assume that genealogy is good, that his line did not die out because the Queen is his descendant, then he would be the ancestor. I mean, I would reckon of everybody in the West again, and perhaps half the Middle East.
He was used as the potential candidate in this book by J.P. Mallory.
I'll have to have a look. Which one? The Origins of the Irish, is it?
Oh, you're
The Origins of the Irish.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions here?
Not really a question. Again, I happen to notice at the bottom of the primer, the last line, which was up by a butler, I can't remember, but the last line had in Irish, Latin, and English, "God save the Queen of England."
Oh yeah, well,
I thought it was nice. In Irish,
that's a real crossover there, definitely. Yeah. That was Nugent, not Butler, but sorry.
And one more.
Baron Delvin.
One more little thing that I just spotted in one of your slides: the Hill family, and Michael Hill was mentioned, or was there, and Hill of Hillsborough. And if that's the same Hillsborough as we have outside Lisburn, then that is one of the Queen's residences.
This is Viscount Dungannon. Is that the same family?
Well, it was Hill, and then there was a descendant, was Anna Hill, or the other way around.
Yes, it is the same family. Yes. I believe.
I thought it was just a nice little circle, that.
I'm doing. So Hillsborough in County Down. Hillsborough Castle must be the same family. The Viscounts Hillsborough, no, are they different people to the Viscounts Dungannon? We're in a little. Does anybody know the Viscounts? So it's the Viscounts Hillsborough. Yes, they are the same. They are the same people. Yeah. Okay.
I was about to say Viscount Dungannon is descended from the O'Neills. The Hillsborough people were descended from Scottish settlers. So unless they intermarried at some point, I don't think they can be the same family.
Yeah, the entire Hill family, the Viscounts Dungannon and the Viscounts Hillsborough, which is all the same Hill family. They descend from the marriage of Michael. Well, first of all, they descend from the marriage of William Hill and Eleanor Boyle, and she is the daughter of the Archbishop of Armagh, whose portrait I showed there earlier. And her mother is Mary O'Brien. So we're back, and that's where the link to OBrien Baron Inchiquin comes in. Did that make sense?
I think Peter might be referring to the link where the Earl of Tyrone was also the Baron of Dungannon, and so that's the O'Neills.
No,
that I think is an earlier
no,
period.
that's a different line to this one. Oh wait. Dash is okay. So that is where the first Viscount Dungannon. Yes, okay. So the first Viscount Dungannon marries Anne Stafford. She descends from Hugh ONeill. He is not the ancestor. I'm doing this on the fly. He is not the ancestor of the Viscount Hillsborough, though. The Viscount Hillsborough is descends from he descends from a brother. Is that right? Michael Hill. Yes, exactly. There's two brothers, Viscount Hillsborough and Viscount Dungannon. Fantastic. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so there's two brothers. One of them marries the descendant of Hugh ONeill. The other one doesn't, and it's the other one who's the ancestor of the Viscounts Hillsborough. So they don't descend from Hugh ONeill.
So Hillsborough Castle, I presume, then travelled down through the generations of the hills, and at some point it must have been donated, and is now the official royal residence in Northern Ireland.
One of the talks in this series, Donald, you may not have been there, was from Alan Greer from Historic Royal Palaces, and he was talking about that history of Hillsborough from before the creation of the castle right the way down to it becoming the royal residence. So that talk is recorded as well.
All right.
That will be there.
So it's the Viscount Dungannon the Queen descends from, but then she descends from his father, Michael Hill, who's the ancestor of the Viscounts Hillsborough. Yeah. So whether he was living in an earlier version of the castle, I'm not sure, but presumably.
To throw one more presumed.
What's happened tomorrow? You do?
We haven't made any decisions yet. We're going to see what the weather's like, etc., etc.
So to throw in one more presumed ancestor, I think, and then we might finish up. Presumably, if you go through the Queen's father's line, you end up back with Stuarts. And then through the Stuarts, you end up with the Kings of Dalriada, who are then coming from North Antrim.
No, I haven't really thought about that one. Yeah. Yeah, there might be, okay.
So,
Another one. bit more homework to look at.
We would then get back to her ancestor Fergus MacCook, sitting back at, putting his feet up at Dunsebrick with St Patrick having a quaff of ale, which is a nice picture for the Queen's ancestor. I think.
We're only scratching the surface here. Wow, yeah.
We're all mixed up.
We're all mixed up.
We are. Yes. Yeah, I think there's a poetry about some of this and these connections, you know. And there's going to be more mixing in the future, you know. But yeah.
Mark, that's very, very interesting, and thank you for coming, and thank you for everyone for coming along tonight as well. And for those of you who've been here for most of the series, thank you very much for that. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we'll talk just for a moment about monitoring and evaluation again. So thank you.